Live. It's Monday, December 30th, 2024. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight we are talking about terminals. So, we do talk about hockey on the show off and on, and usually I try to save that kind of opening bit for Tuesdays because it's gaming related, but
we've always talked about hockey, but we talk about it more when it's hockey season, and we talk about it more when we go to a lot of hockey.
And we've been talking about it less lately, partly because the Rangers, we
talked about them being terrible already. We've already done this.
And the only other, let's see, what's exciting? What has happened in my life since the last Geek Nights episode? I saw some movies we'll talk about on a different day. I biked home from work today, and nothing out of the ordinary happened, except I saw a weird protest, and I didn't know what it was for. So I took a photo. I'm trying to figure it out later.
I mean, there were some Hanukkah events, holiday eating mostly, but nothing out of the ordinary or interesting really happened.
Yeah.
And I don't have to, I guess I had to work tomorrow, but not Wednesday. But then I'll back to Thursday begins a new year and normal-ish going, daily routine goings for however long.
Yep, it's that quiet time of year. But I realized it was extra weird this year, partly because both New Year's Day and Christmas Day, like the 2 days that almost everyone gets off in America, even if you have shitty jobs, are on Wednesdays, like the worst possible day for a holiday to happen. All right, get into the show. I got some news, so it's sad news, but I'd say it's been a long time coming in the sense that the dude was 100. And I feel like he had a pretty good
I'll take
run.
100.
I'll take 100.
If you could tell me guaranteed to live to 100 or live however long you're otherwise going to live, it's like, yeah, I'll take 100 because I'm probably not making it that far. Yep. The odds of it so low.
But never mind, making it to 100 and being active, doing very visible, difficult good works, pretty much up until near the end. Like Jimmy Carter is a goddamn treasure. And I mean, what can we say? He had a pretty good run. But if there's anyone out there, because at this point, talking about Jimmy Carter in the year 2024 is like talking about ancient presidents people barely remember to kids today. So I got to paint a picture. Jimmy Carter was a perfectly good president who was mostly on the right.
It wasn't perfect, but you know what? What president was better?
Yep. Jimmy Carter did mostly good things. Or
Abraham Lincoln, FDR.
Yep. FDR did a lot of good, but also did a lot of really squirrely shit.
That's right.
Some of our presidents have been particularly bad, as we're about to see again in a few weeks.
We had some real shit. If you had to rank presidents on not just how good they were at being president, however, whatever rubric you want to use, but also if you want to rank based on just being a good human being, right? As far as being a good human being, Jimmy Carter might be number one.
I was saying, if there was the concept of a secular saint, like a saint appointed by
he was a religious dude, though. He wasn't secular at all.
Yeah, but I'm saying like he is a saint in the sense that he was basically just a stand-up person dedicating his life to doing good works when he didn't have to.
Yeah, and he got not reelected. It was complicated, but he was not elected to a second term largely because he was doing what he thought was right, and that did not work well in, campaigning.
Also, his opponent, Ronald Reagan, engaged in a treasonous conspiracy to steal the election from him related to the Iran-Contra affair, but that is a whole can of worms you can read about on Wikipedia. But really, I always used to characterize Jimmy Carter as a president where he wasn't reelected due solely to the fact that the world was not in a great shape, and he had the audacity to say that out loud and to talk about how we need to try to face that and do something about it.
Yep. I mean, you look at today, and it's like we have these Republicans who are just evil, right? Mm-hmm. But then they say we're going to do evil. They just say it out loud nowadays. And then when they get in office, they try to do the evil that they said they were going to do, right? They don't always succeed, but they sometimes succeed. So that's good and bad. But They try to do it, right? Like the last time when Trump was president, he tried to like ban the Muslims from coming to the U.S., right? And he failed, but he did it for a while. But the fact, it doesn't matter. He tried to do it. He said he was going to do it, right? And I think Democrats, possibly because not, I don't think they're thinking specifically of Jimmy Carter, right? But it's just, the way they operate, has roots in that where they go and they campaign and they say, we're going to do climate change and healthcare and these things, right? And then they get in office, and do they try to do those things? To some extent, yes, but to some extent also, no, right? They don't do the things they say they were going to do the way the Republicans do, right?
Yep.
The Republicans
Now,
get in office and they try to do it like to the fullest, right? If Republicans believed in universal free healthcare, we would have it already, right? So, the Democrats are like, okay, we want to do climate change. And then they come in and they're like, all right, well, we can't just ban fossil fuel. We got to, kind of right?
It's a little more complex than that in one sense.
Obviously, but the point is,
evil things you want to do are either doable via executive orders, which the powers of the presidency were broadly expanded by evil presidents over time.
Right.
And
the point is that Jimmy Carter was a person who, to a greater extent than Democrats today, right, actually tried to do, right, things that he believed in closer to the way Republicans do today.
A minor counterpoint there. Jimmy Carter
work.
didn't do many executive orders. He really tried to work with Congress compared to Biden, who did more aggressive executive orders than basically any Democratic president in history, all of which succeeded except for a couple.
It's not about the method by which the policy was implemented. It's about the policy that was implemented.
Well, because the policy that was implemented is usually the prerogative of Congress, not the presidency.
I'm just saying, it's not just the president either. You're getting too in the weeds, right?
I think it matters a lot, though, because part of what Jimmy Carter was not able to do most of the things he said he wanted to do and was obstructed at almost every step of the way. He would tell the message anyway. And I think the real divide, the real legacy there is that a lot of progressives and a lot of people who are in the Democratic Party to this day took that to mean if you talk about uncomfortable or difficult subjects, you'll always lose elections because you kind of have to lie and make things simple. And Carter partly took a lot of flack for the fact that he would talk about the economy being bad while he was president.
Mm-hmm.
It was the truth speaking, I think, that was a big part of what ruined him in the eyes of the public. But also a couple
component of, try at least, if you're trying to accomplish evil, you won't be speaking truth.
Yep.
Right. But if you're trying to accomplish good, right, speaking truth is just goes right hand in hand with that.
Yep, at least it should. But as we know, a lot of Americans vote stupidly, and thus you kind of have to trick them into voting for the correct side.
Do you?
Or kids trick them into not voting. So in some other news that is, of course, this kind of thing has been reported widely. It's kind of assumed it's happening. There have been some other cases, but there's a little bit of a notable change now. So today, the U.S. Treasury Department has confirmed that there was a significant breach of their security, like documents were stolen, operator PCs were accessed, internal networks were accessed, and that the intruders were, in fact, state-sponsored actors of the Chinese government. So we're beyond it was someone in China, and we can make a bunch of inferences, but we can't say it. We can't say authoritatively, publicly, yes, the Chinese government did this directly. Just like how Russia, most, quote, Russian hackers are not officially arms of the state government. There's like money laundering schemes and there's criminal mafia and all these other layers to give up plausible or at least pseudo-plausible.
Like when kings used to hire pirates to go on the high seas and harass the other country's boat, but it was just some pirate. It wasn't a guy with money from the king.
Or think about back, the murder of Thomas More, where a king just kind of said, this one particular guy really grinds my gears and it'd be a shame if anything happened to him. And then a bunch of knights went and murdered him.
That's how mafias operate.
Yeah.
You can't pay, you go like, oh, Al Capone, you can't get that guy. He didn't murder anyone. He didn't order the murder of anyone, right?
Yep.
He just said, oh, I hate that guy. He's ruining my business. Right? It would be nice if he was gone. He stopped doing that.
Yep. God, I should
wink,
try to
wink.
find it. I watched a YouTube video like a few months ago that was this like little mini documentary into how the mob operates today, but it had a little bit about a big problem is that all the younger mobsters use smartphones and basically document all their criminal conspiracies.
Yeah, dumbasses.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess you can read the article to see all the details. And I think this is really just the fact that this is being stated directly and publicly is a sign of the increasing tension and escalation of geopolitical conflict between the U.S. bloc and the Russia-China bloc. Like
Right.
it is
obviously. Now the thing is, obviously, this story is a true story.
Yeah.
Right? The State Department came out and just said it.
Well,
It's
the
not
Treasury
some
Department and the State Department.
Yeah, it's not some conspiracy nonsense, right? But conspiracy people, right, would say two things. Number one, right, is the U.S. just making this up to make China look evil, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
You know, pro-China people might say that. And the other question, which I really, this is right, see, that doesn't bother me. That's just normal conspiracy people,
Yeah.
right? The thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around, right, why doesn't China, Russia just make up stories? Obviously, it's happening for real. They probably don't need to make it up, but they could be like, oh, US hacked us, right? They could just make that up without any evidence. And it would be just as believable, right? They could be doing that.
I feel
why
like
why don't they do that? All right. It's like,
so I don't know if they do and it just doesn't get reported on so I'm thinking that in other instances, like,
it's definitely happening.
Like,
there's no way the US isn't at least trying.
everything that's happened in Ukraine and Crimea that Russia caused since 2012 onward was like the entire time Russian diplomats would be formally stating in official channels made up nonsense. Like nonsense to the point like there was a UN Security Council meeting where the Russian guy literally was saying Russia does not have any troops in Ukraine. Meanwhile, there is literally footage of Russian troops in Ukraine on a monitor in the UN.
The Daily Show.
Yeah. Like RoboCop was too generous in terms of what the future would be like. But I'd say a takeaway is just that when these things get stated more openly, these kinds of things by, I don't even want to say trustworthy powers because the U.S. has a pretty mixed history there, but I don't know, more cautious powers or more European-like powers or more stable powers that tend to only make formal diplomatic statements when something real has happened. When that starts happening more frequently, that is often the precursor to a very troubled time. And we're just seeing that everywhere. But two, another takeaway, I still encounter people in serious roles in technology companies or just serious technology roles in non-technology companies who don't take the risk of state-sponsored actors seriously. And I've been in...
You have to be in a business where you have data that anyone cares about.
Yep. Or you have to be in a business where your data might not be that important, but you might have customers that can be accessed through supply chain of you that you're not aware of, which is the most common threat vector. Mm-hmm. But I think there's an old wisdom that gets thrown around that I think is just dead. And Slash Shop people used to be really guilty of this. And I think it was true for a long time, but it's not true right now. And the wisdom was, unless you are a super big, super important company or a military or something, then your threat assessment and your risk assessment for cybersecurity really needs to get up to the level of what would impact your business. And you really only need to worry about threats that someone relatively small fry would attempt against you. But the security environment of the internet today is getting to the point to where extremely well-funded, previously unlikely attack vectors are increasingly common due to state-sponsored action against lower-tier targets you wouldn't necessarily expect. So I would advise myself, in my professional opinion, if you in any way have overlap with cybersecurity in a professional capacity, you should elevate the attention you give to unlikely and difficult to exploit attack vectors compared to, say, a decade ago.
Mm.
Got any news?
Yeah. So there is this guy, and he had some videos on YouTube, and they had some Nintendo stuff in them, as you do.
Yeah.
And everyone's always worried about Nintendo with their IP rules coming to take you down.
And they're
right?
broadly generally right to be worried about that.
All right, and YouTube, the way their copyright system works is that basically any fool could just go make an account and start claiming that videos are copyrighted, and it's the burden of proof is all backwards. It's basically upon the person who uploaded the video to defend themselves, right? And YouTube really doesn't check very hard to make sure that the person who's making this copyright claim is actually someone.
Oh, in fact, I have several videos that are gone permanently because some random company that I am confident does not actually have the rights to anything in that video did takedowns, and it wasn't worth it to lawyer up.
Yeah, it's like I could probably just go on YouTube and be like, oh yeah, I'm Taylor Swift's lawyer, and start posting on like every Taylor Swift fan's YouTube videos and trying to take them down and maybe even collect money or whatever, right? Just for whatever reason, just because I got nothing better to do. Maybe I think I can get some money, or just to abuse people or harass people or whatever. And so this guy, he got some DMCA takedowns from Nintendo, right? But he actually looked into it, and he's like, wait a minute, I don't think this guy works for Nintendo.
Which is already something you shouldn't have to think, because if YouTube has a system where someone registers that they own intellectual property, you would think, even if they don't have to prove infringement, they should at least have to prove that they own that intellectual property.
Yeah.
Or that they are, in fact, working for the company they say they work for.
The guy was using like a not Nintendo email. So then the guy like comes back. He's pretty sure it was someone in like his Discord server. You can read the whole story.
Yeah.
It was like a harasser who was doing it. Right?
Yeah.
And then the guy comes back with a Nintendo email, nintendo.co.jp. But like, yeah, it was obviously, you look at the headers and it was just a, forged, not good email.
Yep.
Right. It was a spoofed email, not a real Nintendo email. And so got his videos back up, right? But the point is, it's like, we could fix, this whole DMCA system. We know what the fixes are, right? But I think there is a short-term fix that I think isn't unreasonable, which is like, hey, how come YouTube doesn't have just like a know your customer on the people who can make the DMCA
Why
claims?
indeed? In fact, like dumpy little LLCs and nonprofits have significant KYC requirements. I can get in deep shit if they fuck that up.
If somebody is going to, if like you look at like Spotify has so much like, forged music going up on there and shit. It's like you could just add KYC. If someone wants to be, if they're going to keep, the horrible copyright system should be changed dramatically. But even if you keep it the way it is, if you just put KYC on the ability to have an account that lets you make claims, that would reduce this kind of bullshit a lot.
Well, case in point, like a nice analogy.
I think if people had some money, there could be a class action against YouTube for allowing so much fraudulent
YouTube
takedown.
Should owe everyone who has ever had to respond to a fraudulent request damages.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like, hey, my video was down for, and whatever. It's like, for a time, and that's a video I was making money off of. I should...
In the very least, like the minimum YouTube should be forced to do would be, if you get a claim against you, one of the options would be, I'm not necessarily formally responding to the DMCA request, triggering the lawyer process. I am simply asking YouTube to prove to me this person has the rights before we proceed. And there can be no risk of your channel being harmed by clicking that option. Like, that would be kind of like how we got to get rid of cars. Like, we got to get rid of roads as they are. But if we made a law saying no car that can go more than 100 miles an hour is allowed to drive on public streets, it would make things better, even if it doesn't fix the other bigger problem.
Oh, I just discovered my record press didn't press.
Uh-oh.
I pressed it late.
Luckily, I have multiple backup audio streams of you. They're just slightly lower quality.
I pushed it now, but I did press it earlier, but I guess it didn't press.
All right. That's fine. All that means is I have to spend about 60 or 70 more seconds editing your audio to do a thing to it, because I actually have a Scott fucked up track that's ready for this. So
well, you'll have to put in the news section, I guess.
Yep, that'll be easy to do. We lost that one episode that one time, and then we lost that other episode for a completely crazy reason that other time, and there's a reason we've never lost an episode again, because I can't. I'm too old. I am too old to deal with that shit. All right. But anyway, things of the day. So this is just a little YouTube video, but it's a really cool pixel animation. It's pretty short. I picked a Monday partly because it's in the vibe of like science fiction or just like people flying rockets around and rocket cars and speed records. It's got a pretty strong aesthetic, and it's just a short animated film about someone trying to set a land speed record in a vehicle. And there's a lot going on here, and it's definitely worth your while. It's worth 4 minutes of your time to watch in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you got?
All right, so these people, they created this programming language / proof assistant called Lean, Lean, and it's a programming language, and you can use it for mathematical proofs, right? And obviously, unless you're some kind of mathematician, what good is that to you?
Yeah.
But they made these little games. There's 4 games, but the game I want to focus on, which is the thing of the day, is the natural numbers game. Because if you've never used the Lean language, this game is also a tutorial for the Lean language, so you don't need to know the language before you start. You could just start playing immediately, as long as you know how to read and, I guess, do basic math, because it's just natural numbers. But it's kind of shocking, and that, like, you use this thing, and within the first few lessons, you like prove addition, right? And it's like, you learned addition, I hope.
Yeah.
But have you proved addition? And it's really wild, actually, just like even the most basic first few levels, right? It's like, to take some, mathy looking thing that has a plus sign in it, and then you reduce it to where it's just something equals exactly the same thing on both sides.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, I guess I proved addition is true. I
used to really
I guess if you could take it further and become really mathy, they got a set theory one, but
I mean, I used to really like doing proofs in high school, but the proofs you do in high school are like below trivial compared to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's it starts with tutorial world, then addition world. Well, after addition world, you can go to multiplication world or implication world. It branches out and takes you. And the final levels on one branch is algorithm world, but the other branch, the final level, is advanced multiplication world. But it's all just proving, I guess, the natural numbers exist.
Yep. Not even getting into imaginary numbers.
The properties thereof.
So what I particularly like about this is that on the left is some text, and the text has some other text that's in a very large font that says, read this. And then there are a couple of sentences, and these sentences are fantastic. Quote, learning how to use an interactive third improver takes time. Tests show that the people who get the most out of this game are those who read the help texts like this one.
Yes. You're not going to get very far if you don't read the text on the left side. That's for sure.
In the meta moment, I got to announce our updated book club selections. I got 2. Well, I got one that I'm definite on.
Well, okay.
No, I got one I'm definite on. I got a second one I got to think on a little bit. We'll do a show on Wednesday. Talk about some Fantastic Four. But also, we will be at MagFest doing a bunch of panels. Really looking forward to that. If you haven't already gotten your hotel and badge arrangements for MagFest, it's probably way too late. The hotels at MagFest.
You could still buy a badge. The prices keep going up, though, so you're losing money because you waited. And you can easily get a hotel room. It's just going to be probably not in National Harbor unless you're super lucky somehow or find something or get an inn or whatever. So you'd have to stay somewhere outside National Harbor and use a shuttle or some other transportation car, pay a bunch of money for a taxi to just get in and out of the National Harbor,
Yep.
which will decrease your MagFest experience.
Not
MagFest
terminally, but appreciably.
Yes, because MagFest is 4 days, 24/7. So like if you just leave at like 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, or I guess get in a shuttle, or you stay late, you get in a shuttle at like 1 a.m. You miss the 3 a.m. DDR. You come back, it's like,
But MagFest is, I think, going to be like last year's MagFest was like possibly the best MagFest I'd ever been to. Like it's fully back. It had improved in many, many ways. MagFest is on an upward trajectory, and I think this year is going to continue that trend. But I did encounter in my mentions a big conversation of people who are complaining that MagFest badge is too expensive. And I want to point something out here.
It's cheaper than PAX, and it's way longer. And
so
you
a
get more
MagFest
for your
badge
money.
right now, $145 something, and you can't get them cheaper.
If you had gotten it earlier, you would have been all set. You could have paid $125 if you got it early.
So complaint number one, inflation happened, all of you people who were talking about like Otakon badges and what they cost in the 90s. But two, MagFest is 4 days and goes 24/7 with basically every part of the con running for those full time ranges. MagFest, if you count hours of entertainment multiplied by options of entertainment, per dollar spent on that badge, MagFest is possibly the best deal of any convention I've ever heard of in America.
You should also mention MagFest badges decrease as the con goes on. If you come in late, let's say you come in like on Saturday, it's only 120 for at door, right? And so if you come in on Sunday, because they know Sunday is garbage, the at door is $35.
Yep.
It's just like, all right, and you can still if you come in on Sunday, you can still do a lot. That's a crazy deal, actually, to go to a MagFest, right? And the other thing is that MagFest is a nonprofit, and unlike, say, other conventions that might have like a mega expo hall that's bringing in tons of money from big industry players buying big booths and all kinds of putting ads up everywhere, right? MagFest doesn't do that. They have a marketplace that they do sell booths in, but it's more like an artist alley. Those aren't big spending big companies. Those are just normal, small businesses, shops and vendors of right. No one very large really, and they don't charge a crazy amount for that space per square foot compared to, say, a PAX.
Yeah, because they're not trying to maximize profit. They're trying to maximize achieving their mission, a big part of which is holding MagFest for the benefit of all the people who attend MagFest.
Almost all the space, the square footage at MagFest is just entertainment for the attendee with no other revenue or price associated with it whatsoever, which cannot be said about most other cons. So the fact that it's only 100, even if you paid the maximum price of $155, which would be the at door on Thursday, that's still a great deal.
Yeah. So we will be at MagFest. It will be a great time. We look forward to seeing you there. Also, we'll probably be doing panels at PAX East. I'll be at ZenkaiCon doing a bunch of panels, and it looks like more people I know will be there than I expected, so it should be a pretty good time. I'd say there's a 1.5% chance I can trick Scott into coming, but I think those odds are going to decrease as time goes on. I'd say it's non-zero.
Okay.
All right, let's get into it. Terminals. So... If you don't know, because we're old enough to where, like, I've used, like, actual old terminals. Like, I've used a VT100.
I used a VT something. I don't know which kind.
It might not have been 100. It might have been one of the... Because there's actually a lot of iterations of terminals because they evolved rapidly. Like, this was an era, if you zoom out on the history of computing, the terminal era basically came and went. And, like, no one today will ever encounter it, know about it, care about it. What they think of as a terminal is a very different kind of thing. But originally...
originally, computers, you had to input data, output data, right?
Yep.
And you could get switches that you, like, flick with your finger, right?
Yep.
Which is really slow and painful. Or you could get, magnetic tapes or punch cards, right?
Punch cards were really common for a really short span of time.
Yeah, and the thing with punch cards is that, you could sit there and punch them, right? And it might take a little while, but if you were good at punching, punching them wasn't really, say, slower than flicking switches or typing necessarily, right? And the punch cards, the computer could read in a stack of punch cards like chicka 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 chicka.
Just
right?
like how Scantrons made it easy for elementary school teachers to grade those tests.
Yeah, and if you had a magnetic tape, a computer could read that in just like zzz, really fast, right?
Yep.
If you tried to input with a terminal, right, way back just by typing, it wasn't good, right? Especially since the earliest terminals didn't have video. They would have to, any output would have to just be printed with like ink on a paper.
Yep. I've never used a hard terminal with like the printer.
Yeah. But it's like, yeah, you would type something and then, the computer, if it had to send any output to you, it would print. And so you were basically talking to the computer with this terminal this terminal protocol, right? You would send it some bytes and it would send back some bytes. And that's how, it worked.
Yep.
And so when we actually got better terminals with video screens on them, they just kept using that same protocol, right? And it's like, yeah, this is still just talking to the computer. It looks like you're sitting at a computer, but you're not, right? You're just sitting at basically a telephone that's calling the computer and talking to it. And when the computer talks back to you, it's drawing text on the terminal is drawing text on the screen. The computer doesn't know how to draw text. It doesn't know what letters are really or anything. It's just bytes come in and bytes come out. And the terminal takes care of showing you and whatever you're going to show and interpreting the keyboard that you're typing on.
And really, where terminals came in and began to shine were two advances. One, when we moved beyond computers basically just doing bulk batch processing of information in a non-interactive way, to interactive programs or interactive work where like you would do something small on a computer, get the result, and then use that to do something else. Like you needed to interact with and modify what was happening in real time, like while you're using it. And two, once we got to the point to where we had computers that could timeshare, multitasking is a relatively new thing in the world. Old computers, old mainframes, were just one big computer doing one thing. They had one terminal. Time-sharing computers eventually grew to the point to where you'd have a bunch of terminals all plugged into one computer, and everyone using a terminal got a percentage of that computer's processing time effectively.
Yeah, it wasn't, it's not like today we have a computer lab and everyone has a computer. It's like, no, it's 1960, 70 something. We got one computer, everybody. That's all we got at this university. Right?
Yep.
We got this one PDP-11 or whatever the hell we got. And everyone is just talking to that computer over the telephone with their own little screen and their own little keyboard.
Yep.
Right?
So I used to, I worked at IBM a long time ago, and some of the things that were in that facility, though these were not used anymore, there were ports to plug terminals into in a lot of the offices because those were routed to the central processing room where in ancient times, a couple of mainframes might be sitting so that people could access the mainframes from their offices.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a network. That's basically, like Scott said, just a bunch of modems connecting you to a computer, like serial ports, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, you could still, that's all really a modem is, right? It's like you basically, your computer, even if you have a computer on your desk, if you have a modem and it goes dee-dee-dee, it does some dial-up, right? What is it? It calls the other computer on the phone. Both of the computers pick up the phone, right? And now they can talk to each other with, bits, right? And electricity. And they talk the same way that a terminal talks to a computer, like the same kind of protocol. And your computer, even though it's a full computer, is still just talking to the computer on the other end that you dialed into the way a terminal would talk to a mainframe, and it gets information back from the computer on the other end, and then your computer does whatever it's going to do with it.
Now, what's kind of fascinating is that for a while, every different kind of computer had its own proprietary protocols, proprietary terminal standard. Like there weren't really standards. Everything was kind of bespoke. Some of them were even like hardwired. But as time went on, And not due to actually any one company. A lot of companies resisted this. Terminals started to standardize on some things. So a lot of things that
Unix.
yeah, Unix, but also like using ASCII as the default character set, using RS-232 like serial ports to connect the terminals instead of all these proprietary connectors and proprietary protocols, stuff like that. Keyboard layouts started to get standardized on the terminals, like arrow keys started to appear everywhere because they were really useful, things like that. So that standardization got to a point to where pieces of what used to be a convention solely due to a physical terminal remain today in a lot of the shells, or what a modern person would call a terminal, when we interact with a computer via the command line directly or remotely over the internet.
Yeah. I mean, when you open up a little terminal window on your computer, what you're really running is called a terminal emulator, right? It's a computer program that is emulating. It's pretending to be terminal hardware, right? And then what is it connecting to? Well, your computer, it's connecting to the computer itself, right? Since the computer is a multi-processing computer, right? There's like a socket on the computer, right? You know, if you're in Linux, you could like ls/dev star and you'll see like these TTYs. So you open a terminal and it connects to one of those, right? With like a network, you know, socket networking inside the computer itself. It's probably just memory mapped or whatever, but you know, and this little program is pretending to be a terminal. A computer is running that program, and the computer is also running itself, and then the terminal that's being emulated talks to the computer itself. So it's not any different. It's
In
the
fact,
same thing.
I don't know if current like popular Linux distros do this anymore, but every Linux I ran throughout the RIT era and even into Beacon, a thing, and if you have the equipment to do this, it should just work. If you plugged something in, like if you had a terminal, like one that would speak over RS-232, a serial cable, and you plugged it into COM1 on a computer, you would just get a shell. Like it happened. I don't know if it still does that.
Going to be, you know, if you get like, at least, I don't know, it depends on the distribution's default settings, but they should, if you press like, if you go get a Linux computer, and usually like it's going to start at like this GUI login thing if you have like a Linux desktop, right? But if you press Control Alt F2, F3, F4, it's going to cycle through. There should be like more TTYs running, right? Which are basically the terminal endpoints on the other end, and you can cycle through them. And then there should be, usually by default, there is one that's like going to be running on your serial port, or maybe even you can get one to run on a USB serial port if you want to. And so you can actually take a second computer, right? Or if you have a terminal for some reason, and plug it in and talk to your computer at your normal desktop computer as if it was 1970 and you had a terminal.
I actually did that for a while at RIT when we were freshmen because I had my computer, but I also brought with me my old 486. And I got Linux running on it, and I had a serial port connected between my computer and that one so I could access it because I didn't have a network in my dorm room.
Yeah, it should, you know, if it doesn't work, you can definitely start. If for some reason your Linux distro isn't running the terminal like on, you know, that interface, you can nothing. Google how to start one up.
I don't think any computers have COM ports on them anymore.
You can use USB or whatever you have.
I'm sure there's a way to make that happen.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, it's like back in the day, I would like the town had a library. And in the town library, they had a computer system where you could look up the books, and they had one computer in the library that you didn't know where it was, and they had terminals all around the library that were always connected to the little menu system.
Yep.
But if you were at home, you could dial into the library and use Telnet or whatever, and sure enough, you could connect to that same terminal, that library computer with a terminal emulator on your home PC, and browse just like you were at the library, and it totally worked. I'm sure nowadays the library just has a website. They don't need to do that anymore.
Yep.
But that worked in the 90s.
And I think it's something, part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is something you really need to internalize is that the entire history of computing is very new. And like, these things aren't that ancient. Like, I was telnetting into systems to check my email in the 2000s in college. Like, null modems were still heavily in use. Germany just phased out the 8-inch floppy disk like this year.
But yeah, so as for like, you know, terminals themselves, right? At least the, the user side, the protocols. It's like there's so many things involved in terminals, in terms of the user interface, but also like the protocols.
Yep.
It's like, oh, you want to have text, positioned on the screen. Well, how big is your screen? Should the text be colored? What color should it be? What, is it going to be bold text? Is it, are we going to support all the Unicode characters or just the ASCII characters? Is there a cursor? Is it going to blink? There's so many like factors to consider. And for some reason, people keep developing new terminals all the time, new terminal emulators all the time, because they're not satisfied with the ones that exist for various reasons, even though basically all of them work, right? It's like if you forced me to use Xterm or your XVT or Kitty or pretty much any of them, I would be just fine, right?
Yeah.
There's like so many of them though, because like people just really want different user interfaces, or they want it to be faster, because it's like if you're doing computery work, this is like the thing you're using the most often. So like any UI or usability improvements or functionality or performance improvements kind of matter a lot, right? But it's just, if you actually look into like what's going on there and think about like, wait a minute, someone made a whole web browser that works in the terminal. How, and when this protocol that's basically just sending, letters back and forth, how does that even work?
Yep.
Right. And it's like, it's kind of amazing what they came up with for how it works. And it's also super annoying if you ever had to program it, because there's just so many, quirky, janky duct tape things you never see, because any modern computer, those things are all just, people have coded the solutions already and you're just running their code.
Yep. What's extra fun is how all of that is before you even get to whatever shell you're using inside of that terminal.
No, the shell doesn't, it doesn't know about the terminal part.
Exactly,
right?
but that's the thing.
The shell is a program that's running.
Yeah, the shell is basically interpreting commands and giving you an environment that is accessible via the terminal.
Yeah, I mean, the terminal program, or the shell basically is just, the program that is running, and then the output of that program, right, goes to the terminal and then is displayed, right? But it's like, if you think about it, a terminal protocol is like really kind of efficient in terms of, data savings, right? It's like if you use like a remote desktop to connect to another computer, it's like it works because we have fast networks and things these days. But it's like, yeah, we have to send across the network, right? We can compress it and use other various tricks. But basically, if you have a 640 by 480 screen, which isn't even high resolution at all, it's low res, we have to send the color of each and every one of those pixels. And what's your frame rate? What, 30 FPS? Okay, so 30 times a second, I have to tell you the color of every single pixel on the whole screen. That's a lot of data. Versus I send you nothing, and if there happen to be some text I have to send you, I send you that text and maybe some terminal instructions, a little bit extra metadata in there, and that's it.
Yep. Well, it kind of shows that some things were developed very early in computing, and even though people had this natural idea of we should move beyond them, the UX of these things ended up, or just the design consideration of these things more broadly, ended up being kind of the best options, or at least very good options. Like the mouse, the way we use command lines, these have stuck around for a reason. They're really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't have, it's funny because like if you just made some OS from scratch today, you wouldn't use like some terminal protocol,
Yeah.
like have a terminal emulator to create the, the command line interface for the computer, right? You would just have
a command line interface.
You would just have a program, right? That was probably just like, the shell and the terminal in the same program, and it's just making OS system calls directly, right? It's not talking over some like network or whatever. But it's like, because they did it that way back in the day and we still do it that way, it's, kind of interesting that like this old tech still, exists in all these places where you might not realize it's there, and is also still kind of compatible with everything that's ever existed. Like, other, a place that terminals have been used a really long time is like, teletype devices for people who, have are not great at hearing, and so telephones are not great for them, so they type instead. And all that really is Yeah, you have a terminal connected to the telephone company and you type, and someone else has a terminal connected to the telephone company and they type, or there's a transcriptionist or who's reading or whatever in between or something, but you're just typing to, from end to end. And today, that's, people just use text messages. They don't use that anymore, I imagine. But I think that system still might exist if you try to use it.
So back in a long, long time ago, when we first got our 486, we had a 2400 baud modem, and I found like the other nerd in my school. His name was Brock Tice. So I wonder if he's no, haven't thought about him in a long time. But this kid was also a computer nerd kid. We both had computers. We both had modems. So we spent a weekend trying to get one of our computers to connect to the other computer with our two modems. And we eventually got it to work and were able to see each other's commands being typed in like telnet windows at each other. And I remember that being like an extremely exciting moment to have connected two computers that weren't next to each other myself using paper books and documentation to figure it out. Because this was before the internet meaningfully existed. And what do we do with it? We never did it again because it was literally worthless.
Yep. But yeah, I think if you're a person who's computering and you might open a terminal and use it all the time without ever thinking about how it works or where it came from or why it is the way it is, it may be worth not spending too much time, but spending some amount of time looking at the history of terminals, what terminal protocols actually look like, and such, and, the history thereof. And it will give you a better understanding of what's going on there.
Yeah. Same thing with networking, with everything. All this old tech is partly because it's actually pretty simple due to the technological limitations at the time. You can learn more of the core concepts from it more easily, I think, than trying to study something modern. Like, imagine trying to learn how network signaling works by looking at modern gigabit Ethernet and whatever the fuck is happening in there versus like differential Manchester that I can calculate by hand and see in an oscilloscope.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where it's like, it's old, therefore it's simple and easy, I guess easy-ish, right? Or somewhat comprehensible, but still in use and relevant.
Yes.
Right? Whereas it's like you go and you try to learn some other old thing and it's like completely irrelevant now, right? But it's like, no, this is something that's super old that everyone's using every single day.
All right.